Is careers work as inclusive as it should be?
Yes, indeed. That is the question that we are going to be attempting to answer today with our guest, Jenny Connick, CEO and founder of Talentino Careers. Welcome back. It is the We Are Careers show with Chris and Sabiha. And Sabiha, how are you sort of feeling about this topic today? What's your kind of stance on this? And how much experience, I guess, do you sort of have in this area?
I'm really excited that we're going to kick open this can of worms, because I think every career professional has such a unique perspective on this topic. So I'm really happy that we've got a guest today in Jenny, who's going to be sort of helping us explore this in detail. So Jenny, a very warm welcome to the show. And for our viewers and listeners who may not be familiar with you and your background already, can you tell us a little bit about your career journey and what has got you into the work that you currently focus on right now, Jenny?
Good morning. Yes, so thank you for having me, I should say. And I think it's really interesting you use that phrase, a unique can of worms, because it is a unique can of worms. So my professional background outside of my current role, which is the founder of Talentino, started in HR, actually. And my focus was around organizational design and training. So it was always learning developments. It was always focused on people's development. And I started Talentino 15 years ago. And it was really because of my oldest son. I've got 4 boys, and Josh wanted some help working out what he should do with his career. And so I kind of applied what I would have done with a middle manager. And then the short version is he then decided to go into a special school as a TA to become a music therapist. I helped his friends and then kind of thought, oh, well, I'll take this to model to schools, see what happens. It was 2011, so careers was in uproar, as all of you at the CDI would know. And then the first school to say yes was a special school. And they said, can you create something for young people with learning difficulties? And I said, yes. Went home, no idea how to do it. Went back, said, can we co-create? And that's where it all started. Yeah, so now currently I am sorry, I've got a little bit of a croaky this morning. Currently the managing director of Talentino. We work with all sorts of schools, over 500 special schools and colleges. And we are really, I guess, building capacity and capability around inclusion and careers and SEND. We're not careers advisors, we are career coaches, and we're also thought leaders, because that phrase, the unique can of worms that is inclusion and SEND and careers is something that we feel we have a moral responsibility to really enable lots of other people to understand more about it. We've listened to thousands of people working in this field, and so we want to share that knowledge, and that's also what we do.
Fantastic. Great intro, Jenny. I think that set us up really nicely for the rest of the podcast. And I suppose it kind of links in, very directly to that question that we kind of asked at the top of the show, which was that idea of, is careers work as inclusive as perhaps it could or should be? Now, I think most career development professionals would probably kind of say that they aim to be as inclusive as possible in the work that they do with clients, with students, with adults, whoever it might be that they're kind of working with. But I guess to kind of come back to that sort of question, where do you sort of stand on that, and how inclusive do you feel careers work is at this point in time, based on the experiences you've had?
I think your point about careers practitioners wanting to be aspirational on behalf of young people with additional needs, absolutely true. I don't think there's anybody that would say that they're not aspirational on those young people's behalf, but there are layers and layers to answer this question. Some of them are very simple and some of them are very complex. So for a start, where does your definition of inclusion? What is your definition of inclusion? And does it include any reference to outcomes? Because it's all very well having loads of events and look at this employer doing this or whatever. But have you actually made any difference whatsoever to the outcomes? Because we know they're poor for young people with additional needs. So what is your definition of inclusion, and does it include any reference to, improving outcomes? So it is possible to be inclusive, but nothing changes. So this is a podcast that's going to be fairly direct from Jenny Connick, the author, but with love. So inclusion indicates that there needs to be an effort, an energy to include. But, you know, we need to think about the outcomes, or what's the point? It's not just about the inputs and the outputs, it's about the outcomes. And going back to my first point, the most basic thing that anybody involved in inclusive careers work needs to know is who these young people are. So, for example, if you were to put a search in Google for an image of somebody that with additional needs, you would come up with somebody in a wheelchair, or it would. 1 in 100 disabled people use a wheelchair. My point is that young people with additional needs are a suite of diverse groups, and we need to understand who they are, not from the perspective of, you know, their disability, but or their additional need, but from the perspective of what is the optimal career outcome. So we created this model called Career Send Group 1 and 2. So taking the Send Code of Practice, which identifies 4 areas of additional needs, we didn't want to come from that perspective. We wanted to come from what's possible, what's optimal, what should we be working towards. So Career Send Group 1 are young people who will not take GCSE or level 2 qualifications. And we took that kind of delineation because GCSEs are the door opener to your first career step after school. But for this group, there are huge numbers of potential optimal career outcomes, like supported internships, accessible apprenticeships, FE college, supported self-employment, and so on and so on. Lots and lots of different options. Key issue for this group, supply and demand. There aren't enough employers offering opportunities. There aren't enough FE colleges offering the levels of courses that these young people need. There are also 3 pathways that go through Career Send Group 1. So you're looking at, pathway 1 would be those who would be able to go into employment or supported employment. Level 2 would be, pathway 2 would be around more supported volunteering, supported living, and pathway 3, the focus would be on the quality of life, community, leisure, and support, and so on. Career Send Group 2 would be those young people who could or would be able to do GCSEs, level 2 qualifications and or higher. But within that group, again, you've got 3 groups. So you've got a group who, and all of these groups will experience barriers. So the first group would be those who would have some sort of physical disability, so they would need some sort of reasonable adjustments. The second group would be those for whom there is a context around them which will impact on their ability to engage in early career development. So young people in care, young carers, Gypsy Roma travellers, and so on. And then the third group are young people who we would describe as having had an adverse childhood experience, or ACEs for short. And for this group, the possibility of them engaging in early career development is going to be very low. It takes a very skilled, trauma-informed approach to career coaching to engage this group. So when you're thinking about inclusion and special needs, I doubt that many employers think about that whole gamut of young people. And we have to, as career practitioners, understand who are we working with? What do they need?
And I think that's a really interesting point, Jenny. I know you're going to kind of expand on this a little bit, but it kind of comes back to some of the stuff that we've been hearing, I guess, sort of in recent months, or maybe recent years, we might say, about some of that kind of pushback about EDI initiatives, particularly in like the HR community, where it's not so much a pushback on the purpose of EDI, but as you were saying, how maybe it's being implemented. And that idea of actually, is it having an impact on any outcomes at all? And is it doing anything to actually remove structural barriers or individual barriers for people? Or is it just there to say that we're trying to be inclusive? Because as you say, they're 2 very different things. And I believe that, you know, that idea of kind of barriers is something that certainly for yourselves at Talentino, the work that you've kind of been doing, it's that recognition, as you say, it's not just about necessarily employers, it's not just about the individual, but actually there's a variety of barriers, aren't there, that people with additional needs have to overcome.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, I could have, you know, we're here to talk about the book as well. You know, I could have entitled it, So What? because it's our favourite question. But for young people with additional needs, there are multiple barriers, as you say, Chris. And I think, these include things that are way out of our scope of responsibility, or I wouldn't say influence, but, so things like national policy, education policy, the wider SEND policy, the funding crisis for SEND, the local authority, the fact that SEND funding is making local authorities go broke, which is just bonkers. If I give you an example, so they have to have a process for education and healthcare planning for people making applications, and 98, so the vast majority get turned down, but 98% of those are won on appeal. So you imagine local authorities not spending that money on legal fees, but actually spending it on support in the first place. Just a point. The systems around young people with SEND, the lack of understanding and anxiety, unless we actually, recognise and appreciate and understand that people are anxious around people who are different from themselves. And we start from that point. So it's the same with employers. We do with our employer training, we shut the door and go, right, say everything you want to say, right? We're not judging, we're not repeating, we're not writing anything down. And then it's always about, I really want to support, but I don't know, what to call them. I don't know what they can do, what they can, and it's like, look, just let's appreciate that there is this anxiety. I mean, there's 22,000 disability confident employers, and they're going through disability confidence training at the moment. That tells us something, that we can be aspirational and change policy and all the rest of it, but we need to address the stuff that's right here, and I think that the whole thing about parents, carers and families, they are the only people that are alongside those young people forever. And we need to find much better ways to include them, to keep them alongside, to sustain their engagement and appreciate what they're going through, which gets in the way of that engagement. So these barriers, obviously, they impact on our careers work. And so we have to work 2 or 3 times as hard to achieve the same level of outcome as we would with maybe a young person that doesn't have an additional barrier. And I think when I was thinking about this earlier, I thought, gosh, that sounds really gloomy, doesn't it? But it isn't. We know that progress is being made. So 65% of adults, when we started, wanted a paid job. 10% had one. We know we've done a really great thing in education, because now 86% of adults, 12 years later, want a job. However, the employment rate has halved. So we're building aspiration, we're building career readiness. I say we, the collective we, the whole careers village, but we need those employers.
Yeah.
There's no doubt.
Oh, wow. Okay. We weren't lying when we said that we were going to kick open a can of worms. And honestly, Jenny, I am finding your sort of transparency on this subject so refreshing, because this is the type of conversations that we need to have as career professionals. We can't dodge these conversations.
Totally.
So I'm so grateful that you're here with us today talking about this and sharing your insights. And I loved how you sort of categorized things and then broke them down into further subsections and what that looks like and what that means, because as you've said, it's layered. It isn't just this one thing and then that's it. And then just sort of what does that look like from different perspectives? And I love this category of send one and send one groups and what that sort of pathway looks like for that particular group of individuals. And you mentioned there as well the book. And I want us to get into that a little bit now. So, you've explained that there are so many unique challenges that come into play when it comes to supporting, the career development of individuals. And I love this analogy that you've used about the career village. And then within that village also includes, lots of different stakeholders. Now, the big inclusive Send Careers Handbook, which you've published with Trotman. Can you tell us more about what inspired you to write that book and what can readers expect when they pick up the book?
Yeah, so I wrote a short book in 2022 called The Little Send Careers Handbook. So there was only one title for this one, wasn't it, really? And we had about 4,000 of those go out. But inclusion has been much more mainstream, if you like, both in mainstream and also a mainstream topic in the last few years. So I was approached by Alex at Trotman's, and I think she heard me speak at some point. So it was really funny because I've not written like a grown-up book before. The first version I wrote was fine, but Alex said, and this is absolutely biting, but she said somewhere in here is a good book. So I thought, okay, so that means it's not good right now then. And then she said, could you write it as you speak? So I guess as I'm speaking now, which is fairly direct, with passion, love, but it's direct. So that was it. I was off then. I could write, it just flowed. And so the book is kind of like how I feel about this subject, but it's also about the fact that you can't just have a list of A to Z of doing, if I do this, then I'll have an inclusive careers offer. You've got to feel it. You've got to want it. You've got to want it on behalf of those young people. And you've got to bring others along with you, because you're not going to solve this on your own. So I suppose the book is a kind of mixture of a campaign to get the reader to sort of better understand what inclusion is, and how they can then deliver a fully inclusive careers offer. So it's logical. It's sequential, or you can just start at the back, or you can start anywhere you like, because each chapter lives, on its own as well. Every chapter has a guest contributor. So I went to all the kind of like key stakeholders like David Morgan, Ollie de Baton, John Yarham, Kelly Dillon, all the key kiddies, as I call them. It's not disrespectful. It's just a little label I give them all. And I asked them to write a little piece at the end of each chapter. So there's 19 guests in there as well, which is really interesting, including youth voice. And the other thing that I think that's really, there's a lot, obviously I think it's all interesting, but every chapter has what's called a My Little Checklist. I wanted to call it My Little Pony, but they said no, Trotman said no. Anyway, it's My Little Checklist. And what it does is it poses questions to the reader, so they can almost do an audit of their own practice. And if you actually, there's 19 of them. If you put them all together, you'd have a kind of inclusive careers practice workbook, and you could actually develop a whole offer from putting all of those together.
Can I just come in here, Jenny?
Yeah.
You're inspiring me, and I suspect that you're inspiring the audience that's listening here today. And by the way, if you haven't already subscribed to our channel, whether you're listening to us on Spotify or you're on YouTube, make sure that you do, because it ensures that you make sure you never miss an episode from us. But coming back to Jenny, what you're saying, why should anyone care? I just want to because you're so passionate about this, and I can feel it. I can feel that passion oozing off the screen. And so why does any of this matter, Jenny?
I suppose the evidence as it matters is as soon as you take away somebody's anxiety around that subject, you see their heart just leap out and they want to support. I've never met anybody who doesn't want to. The people who back off are those who are anxious, and nobody's helped them unpick that anxiety and where it comes from, and told them you're not to blame for that anxiety. There's a whole bunch of stuff, that actually comes to play when that anxiety is there. So you take the anxiety away, you enable them to understand who these young people are, you give them the kind of knowledge around what's possible, what does an optimal career outcome look like. We use the word career to mean you learn new stuff over a period of time. It's not doctor, lawyer, teacher. And then you can actually, and then they just come towards you and they want to engage. So yeah.
So as you say, it's kind of that practicality that comes in with the checklists and some of the other points you've sort of mentioned, because I think to lead on from what Sabiha was saying, I think, and really what you've said, that anxiety often, as you said, comes from people who they're just not sure what steps to take. So as you said, they're earnest, they want to help, but what steps do I take? And coming back, I guess, to your point about the career village side of things, you mentioned lots of different kind of guest contributors. Is the book then sort of suitable really for people in those variety of kind of career roles, whether we're talking about careers leaders, career consultants, careers advisors in schools, colleges, other settings? Is that sort of practicality within the book suitable for people at those kind of different careers?
Yeah, I mean, it's there's content specifically for careers leaders, specifically for careers advisors. I don't quite know what a careers consultant is, Chris. I mean, I do, obviously, but, just...
That's a very higher education reference, so apologies, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I think anybody that wants to see outcomes improve for the young people, for the clients they've got, even if they're not young, understanding who they are, what the potential outcomes are, what the process is, who needs to get involved. You know, whoever you are in careers, it works for you. And I've had feedback from people who've read the book. So that's been students of careers advisor students. So a level 7 careers advisor student who said she used it on every assignment, which was quite giddy, but a little bit, you know, humbling. From parents, from careers leaders, from careers advisors, because it's I guess it's more of a kind of, it's more of a philosophy, isn't it? It's about saying, you know, like everybody has the right to a purposeful life. How do we enable them as careers practitioners, whatever our role, to ensure that that can happen? You know, so
that's a really interesting analogy, because I not connected at all, but we were talking about this recently in relation to stuff around AI and saying, when you've got a landscape that changed very quickly, it's perhaps impossible to have a playbook that is just rigid and set. And I guess it's very true, as you said, with the additional needs space. It's not something that is, it's not a homogenous group of people. It's not a space that is kind of set in stone and it will never change. So you can't just simply follow a 5-step process. But actually, as you said, it's more of a ethos and approach. And if you stick within that ethos and approach, you're able to adapt and I guess sort of deliver in a way that's inclusive. But actually, it's not as simple as just follow these 5 steps and you will.
And it's interesting you use the word homogenous, because it's something in the early days I always used to say, you know, people think that special needs is like a homogenous lump of people over there, and it isn't. It, you know, there are people with additional needs in every setting, every educational setting, every community, everywhere. And so, you know, we were sort of thinking of having an employment program, you know, for employers called We're Already Here, because actually there are already, you know, people with special needs in your organization. It's not like sort of, oh, there's one over there. And so that, so getting away from that thinking. So there are some very, I guess, in terms of the philosophy, there's some very kind of like simple sort of tenets to it, which is, you know, understand who these young people are, you know, appreciate the fact that everybody has a right to a purposeful life, understand what career development looks like, and understand the kind of nuances within it for people with additional needs. We find as well that people who don't know much about disability or additional needs, the first thing they ask you is like, oh, could you tell me kind of, they want to say what's wrong with them, but they, you know, can you tell me what the diagnosis is? And we say no. Because actually, that's not where you start. You start with, what does an optimal career outcome look like? Do you know enough about supported internships? Do you know enough about foundation apprenticeships? No. Okay, well, let's talk about those first. And then we look at these 2 career SEND groups, which is interesting because the number of times people I've talked about that, and the first thing people say is, but what about the ones in the middle? Okay, right, let's have a think about this then. So start with the outcomes. Where is somebody likely, what are the range of outcomes that somebody could achieve? Then we start and you work backwards from that. So you always work backwards from the outcome. So it's interesting that people, you know, it comes from an anxiety. If I know more about the diagnosis, I'll be able to understand them. No, as careers practitioners, we need to know about what an optimal career outcome looks like.
Do you think there's kind of anxiety around that, perhaps for fear of it being too deterministic and not aspirational enough? So this idea of, you know, an optimal outcome, perhaps for some people feeling like, are we putting somebody into a box where we feel they can't achieve more than that? Do you think that's where some of that anxiety could come from? Or do you feel it's just a misunderstanding?
Maybe not. I just think people generally, unless you're really in it, I just think generally people just don't know. I mean, when you look at the practice in special schools, honestly, so much of the time they could be showing mainstream schools how to do it really well. The differences in mainstream schools and colleges, as you all know, and universities, it's a volume challenge, and it needs a volume solution which doesn't exist yet.
Yeah, and I'm so happy, Jenny, that because literally you've taken sort of words out of my mind, because this is exactly what I was thinking. Because I know so many of my fellow colleagues, career professionals, who have such limited time. Literally, they've got like 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes.
Yeah.
How are you supposed to, you know? And they'll say to me, Sabiha, how am I supposed to do this in this space of time? And I'm supposed to be seeing X number of people. How do you produce quality? That is always sort of a message. And then you've just sort of said, like, what would your answer to that be, Jenny? If you had a very limited amount of time and you were working, as you mentioned, on scale where you were having to support large numbers, what would good practice in your mind look like?
Yeah,
Jenny?
so for me, first of all, it's understanding what a career development process is. It isn't the Gatsby benchmarks. The Gatsby benchmarks are a series of standards, but career development is a process. So in other words, who am I? What am I interested in? How am I exploring careers? How am I going around making career decisions? How am I building employability skills? How am I managing my career plans? And what decisions am I making? How is transition being managed? So it's kind of like, it's a process, a sequential process. So are we actually looking at, do we have to do all of that process? No, we don't. We need to look at who else is that careers village concept. Who else could be involved? And you mentioned AI, Chris, and I honestly believe AI can be a massive help, particularly around that sort of who am I, what careers am I interested in, careers exploration, skill development. So there are big chunks that could be, using tech to actually sort of as part of that village.
Absolutely. And I think it just kind of comes back to what you were saying, this idea that, we hear a lot of advocates of sort of inclusive design talk about it, that the idea is that you get inclusive design right and it's good for everyone. It's not about targeting one group of people. It's like, actually, this is beneficial for anybody. Yeah. And as you say, you get the same, I guess, is true of a inclusive career development process. It's not about actually benefiting one group of people. It's benefiting everybody that might come into contact with that approach or that ethos. Yeah,
exactly. If you look at transition, where there's a lot of focus on transition in special schools, in mainstream schools, it's just like a sort of rite of passage, isn't it? Kind of like you get to year 11, you go to your prom, you get your results on that day, and off you trot. Whereas who look in special schools, people are, youngsters are prepared for a year, maybe 18 months before that transition is made. And nobody's looking at it in mainstream. We're not looking at it on a micro level. We're not looking at the transition in terms of how parents and carers and families experience it. We're not looking at, even maybe how employers experience it, or, it's a very, there are things that are kind of, I think, that would benefit those young people that could be done at a much more granular level, but not necessarily by one person, but could be done by sort of mixed methodology type thing.
Yeah, and it's such a good point, as you say, that actually, often I think anyone in a position where you're in a kind of helping or a supporting role, you can often feel like, the weight of the world is on your shoulders. You've got to fix this all by yourself. But as you say, it's, it does take a village. And this brings us really nicely, I guess, to kind of our last question, which is, we talked a lot about, some of the practicalities, some of the anxieties, I guess, also as well, that people have around this kind of topic. I suppose if we've got kind of careers professionals or anybody else who's kind of interested in this area of work, who's been watching or listening to the podcast, and they're keen maybe to kind of enhance inclusivity within their practice, or kind of, maybe just sort of take a reflective look at what they're doing, what would maybe be kind of like 3 top tips or 3 starting points that you would suggest, that you think, okay, this is a really good place where people can start with this or continue with this if they're wanting to make their practice more inclusive?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing is understanding who the young people are you're working with. Start with with the potential optimal career outcomes in mind. Do you actually understand? Do you know what they are? Do you know what's available locally? And then understand what reasonable adjustments need to be made to address those young people's needs, not the other way around. Secondly, I would say use the My Little checklists in the book, because this will enable you to do an audit of how inclusive is your careers practice now. I did check on Amazon; it is 20% off today. But also, make a free way of doing this is to make contact with other careers practitioners through the CDI, Senkos. Contact your local careers hubs. Check out social media groups and charities. People like Ambitious About Autism. And your local authority. See what they're doing, so you can do all of that research to see what's going on around you. And thirdly, just ask yourself the question, so what? So in terms of you all work hard. I know you do, but does it deliver improved outcomes for young people? If it does, absolutely brilliant. Hat off to you. And if it doesn't, go back to number 2.
I love that. I love that sort of process. And that brings us to the end of the show. So I want to say a massive thank you to you, Jenny, for joining us on the podcast today. Now, Jenny, you did mention that there is a little bit of an offer on an Amazon. So if any viewers and listeners want to connect with you about this topic, as well as get their hands on the book, where's the best place that they can reach you on? Which social media platform is the best one to reach you on?
Yeah, so I beg your pardon.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Yeah, so my LinkedIn profile is very active, so I would connect with me there.
Fantastic. And then you mentioned there that Amazon is a good place for people to download the book. Is it also available on the Trotman website directly as well?
Yeah, it's available on Trotman's, and you can get it on Kindle as well.
Fantastic. So there we go, everybody. You heard it here first. As always, any of the resources we've talked about today, so the book that we've mentioned, Jenny's LinkedIn profile, any of those kind of things, we will put in the episode notes on YouTube and Spotify. So have a look for them there and you'll find everything that we've kind of talked about. But that brings us very nicely to the end of the podcast for another week. So again, a massive thank you to Jenny for joining us on the podcast today. Definitely a topic that we need to revisit, and one that I think we've got a lot more kind of mileage in, a lot more hours worth of podcasting in. But that's all for today. And of course, thank you to all of you watching and listening to the podcast, wherever you may be, on YouTube or Spotify. And we will catch you in the Career Sphere next time around for the next episode of We Are Careers. See you then.